You have chocolate. It's in your kitchen right now, probably. A bar in a drawer, a box from someone who loves you, a hot chocolate mix you haven't touched since winter. It's the most ordinary thing in the world. You've had it since before you could talk. Nobody ever sat you down and explained it to you. It was just there, the way sugar is there, the way bread is there. Here's the thing, chocolate comes from a tree, not a factory, not a formula, a tree growing somewhere that someone planted. And I never once asked myself where that tree came from, or who decided it should grow there, or why it grows so well in one part of the world and nowhere else on Earth in the same way. I started looking into it, not because I doubted chocolate, because I got curious about the tree. What I found wasn't really about chocolate at all. It was about a place I'd been told my whole life was empty, and about a piece of paper written by a half-blind man on a riverbank that said otherwise. One riverside village, encountered by a Spanish expedition in June of 1542, held enough stored food to feed 1,000 men for a year. That's the number I kept returning to. And the more I looked at it, the more the chocolate sitting in my kitchen drawer began to feel different. I wasn't the only one who noticed, not even close. I brought it up at dinner. I brought it up online. And I kept hitting the same wall in other people. Nobody had ever really thought about where cacao trees came from, or who was living where they grow before anyone we'd call history showed up. It's not a fringe question. It's not a specialist's concern. It's a shared, quiet, never quite named unease about something almost everyone eats and almost no one has ever traced back to its source. We were taught the place cacao comes from was empty, untouched, a green blank on the map before Europeans arrived. So here's the question nobody asks. How did this come to be so ordinary? A tree, a forest, a whole system that fed people when it is, when you actually look at it, so strange that we were told none of it was ever really there. Here's what we've always been told. The Amazon rainforest is untouched wilderness, a place too poor, too acidic, too hostile to ever support a real civilization. The old stories about riverside cities, granaries, and organized farmland were dismissed as sailors' tall tales, invented to cover up a failed mutiny or chase the myth of El Dorado. And I want to be honest, that explanation is not nothing. It's reasonable. It rests on real evidence. Amazonian soils genuinely are, in most places, thin and acidic. Scientists who built this idea, people like Betty Meggers at the Smithsonian, were working from real soil samples and real agricultural limits. Serious people built this from genuine research. It accounts for almost everything. Almost. Across 6,000 to 18,000 square kilometers of the Amazon basin, there is soil that shouldn't exist by that model at all. Dark, fertile, near neutral, built from centuries of human activity. Hilbert and Sointgen documented it in 2020. Sombrook's team documented it back in 2003, which means the chocolate you have in your kitchen, the bar that feels so ordinary, sits in that gap, in the space between what we've been told about that land and what the specific record actually shows. And then I found it somewhere else. Not a similar thing, the same thing. Along the bluff zones above the Amazon's floodplains, researchers have mapped thousands of patches of what's called terra preta, dark earth. Sombrook's 2003 survey and Hilbert and Sointgen's 2020 work both measured it the same way. A pH near 6.7, almost neutral, sitting in the middle of soil that everywhere else runs below 4.5. Nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, all elevated, all stable, for centuries. The official record calls the surrounding Amazon agriculturally hostile. It has no clean explanation for soil sitting right next to it that supported continuous farming for hundreds of years. 2 instances, different sites, different centuries of use, same basin, the same gap, in the same place, and chocolate grown from trees that thrive in exactly this kind of engineered ground sitting in both of them. In the bluff zone soils of the Amazon basin, researchers measured terra preta at up to 18,000 square kilometers of near-neutral human-built earth. Hilbert and Sointgen, 2020. The official model says this land can't hold nutrients. It cannot explain soil that held them for centuries. That's not a small patch. That's a footprint the size of a small country. Same silence in the record about who built it. In the forest canopy above that same basin, an international team flew LiDAR across 5,315 square kilometers and modeled between 10,272 and 23,648 earthworks, still hidden under the trees, ring ditches, causeways, raised roads. Peripato and colleagues, published in Science, 2023. The official model says this land was never densely settled. It cannot explain tens of thousands of structures built into it. And that survey only covered a fraction of the basin. By the researchers' own accounting, more than 90% of the Amazon's settlement history is still sitting under canopy that hasn't been scanned at all. What's been found so far is the visible edge of something the official record never budgeted for. Further out, the forest itself changes. Same silence. Across 1,091 inventory plots spanning the entire basin, the Amazon Tree Diversity Network found that domesticated species cacao among them are 5 times more likely to be hyperdominant than wild ones and cluster tightly around known human sites. Levis and colleagues, Science, 2017. The official model says this forest grew wild, untouched. It cannot explain a forest that is disproportionately made of the exact trees people would have planted. Each layer sits directly on top of the last. Soil built by hand. Structures built by hand. A forest planted by hand. Different centuries within the same basin, different research teams working independently, the same specific silence in what we were told. And underneath all 3 layers, the same written testimony keeps surfacing: Carvajal's account of causeways, ceramics, and 500 miles of continuous riverside settlement, dismissed for nearly 400 years as a mutineer's excuse. Modern researchers didn't set out to vindicate a 16th century chaplain. They just kept landing on ground he'd already described. This is not the shape of coincidence. Coincidence scatters. This clusters. Think about what it would take for that clustering to be an accident. A soil chemist would have to accidentally measure fertility patterns that happen to match, by coincidence, where a remote sensing team accidentally found buried structures, which would have to accidentally sit under a forest that a botanist, working independently, accidentally found was disproportionately made of exactly the food-bearing trees you'd expect people to plant. Each, accidentally, is possible on its own. Stacked 3 deep, in the same basin, it starts to look like something else. And chocolate is in every one of those layers, not metaphorically. Cacao is one of the confirmed domesticated hyperdominants growing in the fertilized soil near the hidden earthworks, planted by the people the official story says weren't there. You were not handed something incidental. You were handed the end product of a system that took generations to build. Here's what the official explanation requires you to accept, not as a conspiracy, as simple arithmetic. One team of soil scientists, working independently, documented up to 18,000 square kilometers of engineered fertile earth inside a region the model calls infertile. One team of remote sensing researchers, working independently, modeled over 10,000 hidden structures inside a region the model calls unsettled. One team of forest ecologists, working independently across more than 1,000 plots, found the forest itself disproportionately built from human-planted species inside a region the model calls untouched wilderness. 3 separate scientific fields, 3 separate research groups, publishing between 2003 and 2023. All converging on the same conclusion: the founding 20th century model was built specifically to rule out. Sit with that for a second. Not because it's dramatic, because it's just what the numbers say when you put them next to each other. 20 years separate the earliest of these findings from the most recent. Different funding bodies, different countries, different journals. Nobody in soil chemistry in 2003 was reading LiDAR papers that wouldn't exist for another 2 decades. None of these teams set out to find each other. A soil scientist mapping chemistry has no reason to coordinate with a remote sensing engineer flying LiDAR transects, and neither has any reason to coordinate with a botanist counting tree species across 1,000 plots. They used different instruments, asked different questions, and answered to different institutions entirely. And they landed, independently, on the same buried civilization. I am not saying someone coordinated this. I am saying the coordination problem doesn't have a clean answer inside the official explanation, and the official explanation has never been required to provide one. Chocolate is the product of that convergence. Whatever built the soil it grows in, whatever raised the earthworks near it, whatever planted the forest around it, you are holding the output of a system that 3 independent scientific fields, 20 years apart, all stumbled onto separately and called wilderness until they couldn't anymore. If any of this has made you want to keep pulling on this thread with me, that's what this channel is for. Subscribe, and I'll keep going down into the next layer with you. Gaspar de Carvajal, on a riverbank near the Rio Negro, late June 1542. He is holding a notebook. He is not a soldier. He was the chaplain assigned to Francisco de Orellana's expedition, the first Europeans recorded descending the length of the Amazon. His job was to keep the record: what they saw, where they went, what happened. During a skirmish over a defended village storehouse, an arrow struck him in the side of the face. It destroyed his eye. He recorded the injury himself, in his own words. He had lost his eye, and was still not free from suffering or pain. He kept the notebook anyway, through the rest of the voyage, out into the Atlantic and back to Spain, where he and Orellana stood trial for mutiny before the king. He was not making a decision. He was doing his job. And his job, done exactly as designed, produced a written record that would sit largely dismissed for nearly 400 years until soil scientists and LiDAR teams started confirming, point by point, what he'd written down half-blind on a riverbank. Carvajal did not know what he was part of. The record does not show that anyone told him his notebook would eventually be the only surviving first-hand account of a civilization the rest of history decided to forget. That is either ordinary bureaucracy or the most important thing in this entire investigation. The record cannot tell us which. He wasn't a general or a governor. He was the man whose job was to write things down. He kept doing that job with one eye, in a small boat, on a river no European had ever mapped, because it was simply what he had been sent to do. The empire he served didn't remember him for it. Orellana got the territory, the crown got the claim, and Carvajal's manuscript went into an archive where it sat, largely unread, until historians started pulling it back out centuries later to check it against the soil. I want to be honest with you about what I cannot prove, not as a disclaimer, as the most important thing I can say. I cannot prove exactly how large the Amazonian population was before contact. The estimates researchers use range widely, and the true number likely died with the people who could have told us. I cannot prove whether the erasure of this story was a deliberate institutional choice, or simply what happens when the vast majority of a population dies before anyone can ask them what they built. And I cannot prove what else is still sitting under that canopy. The researchers themselves say over 90% of it remains unexcavated, which means most of this story, by their own admission, hasn't been read yet. What I can show you is the pattern. What I cannot show you is the intent. And I want to be clear, a pattern without documented intent is not proof of anything. It is a shape in the record that the official explanation has not been required to account for. I'm also aware that I've been looking for this pattern for a while now. Minds that look for patterns find them. I am not exempt from that. What I'm asking you to do is not to trust my pattern recognition. I'm asking you to look at the specific documented instances I've shown you, the soil, the earthworks, the forest composition, and tell me whether the wilderness explanation accounts for all of them. It does not account for all of them. That is not my conclusion. That is the gap. I'd rather leave you with a gap than a story that fits too neatly. Neat stories are usually the ones that got edited on the way to you. There is one thing the record preserved that connects the chocolate in your kitchen to everything I've shown you. Living cacao trees, growing today, in direct spatial alignment with the earthworks and the fertile soil the researchers mapped. Confirmed hyperdominant, confirmed domesticated, Confirmed by the Amazon Tree Diversity Network's own plots. It exists. It's accessible. It's growing right now, this year, in the same ground it was planted in centuries ago. It didn't survive because someone protected it. It survived because the system that erased everything around it never recognized what it actually was. Chocolate is in your kitchen drawer. It was there before you watched this. It'll be there after. Nothing about it has changed. The same wrapper, the same weight in your hand, the same smell when you open it. What's changed is what you know about where it came from. About the 400-year window in which the civilization that engineered it was written out of the record entirely. About Gaspar de Carvajal, half-blind, protecting the one document that survived to contradict that erasure. About 3 separate scientific fields, working decades apart, independently proving him right. The tree wasn't domesticated for you. It was domesticated by people who had a plan for the next 1,000 years and no reason to think anyone would forget they existed. It was processed, generations later, into a story that had a specific designation for what that land was, wilderness, and no designation for what had actually been built there, or for what a half-blind chaplain had written down and nobody believed. 95% of the people who built that system were likely gone within 100 years of first contact, mostly from diseases that outran the explorers who carried them. The trees didn't die with them. The trees kept growing, the way a garden keeps growing after the gardener is gone, until what had been rows and orchards just looked, to the next people who arrived, like jungle. That's not a metaphor for what happened to the historical record. It's the same mechanism. A managed system, left alone, gets mistaken for wilderness. A written testimony, left unread, gets mistaken for fiction. Both take exactly 1 generation of not asking to disappear. The living forest remains, and if you look at it long enough, it tells you exactly how something becomes ordinary. Not through familiarity, through the completely ordinary act of no one ever explaining why it was necessary in the first place. Chocolate has been in your life since before you could read. You've never been asked whether you wanted the story that came with it. You've never been told what that story replaced. Somewhere in the Amazon basin right now, a cacao tree is standing in soil someone built by hand, centuries before the word wilderness was ever used to describe the ground under it. Nobody is guarding that tree. It doesn't need to be guarded. It just needs someone, eventually, to ask why it's growing exactly where it's growing. That's what I did. That's what this was. What would you do differently if you had been?